All right, talk about socialism. Colombia, the country, Colombia, has quite a left-wing president. First left-winger ever to be elected president in Colombia. And one of the things this left-wing president wants to do is he is trying to pass healthcare reform that would basically dramatically increase the role of government in providing healthcare in Colombia. Luckily for Colombia, the parliament is not dominated by the left wing, so he doesn't have a controlling position in the parliament. And as a consequence, Parliament is holding up his healthcare reform. They're objecting to his attempt to basically nationalize healthcare. It turns out that in Colombia, about 90% of medical services are currently carried out by private companies. 90%. Now, the government pays for most of it through a private insurance system. So there's private insurance, well, buy private insurance, but I guess the government pays the private insurance companies, it backs it all up, in some way. And ultimately, the government is paying for healthcare while the healthcare is being delivered by private entities. So far from being ideal, but, very much like Medicare in the United States. I mean, the reality is that almost all the healthcare you get in the U.S. is provided to you by private individuals, by private doctors, private hospitals, private clinics, private imaging labs, and so on. But that the payment for it often comes from the government. The reality is that the government pays well over 50% of all healthcare costs in the United States. And often, the funding that the government provides is funneled through the private insurance companies. And it looks like Colombia has a similar system. So here you've got a president trying to move it towards socialized medicine. And he's failing. So what's he doing instead? Basically what the government is therefore trying to do, because it can't get its legislation passed, is it's trying to destroy the private insurance market. It's trying to get rid of private insurance companies. How is it doing that? By not paying them. By not paying them. So the private health insurance insurers are claiming that the administration, the regime there, is transferring less per user than required by law and haven't paid, with accumulated debts going above $2.2 billion. Now, of course, the administration is denying all this. But the effect of this is, I think what the government hopes, is that insurance companies will collapse. And as insurance companies collapse, private individuals who have insurance with these companies are then moved into the public system. And as insurance companies go away, more people now become dependent totally on the public system. And this is how you socialize healthcare without actually having legislation passed that socializes healthcare. You just destroy the private market and you make the socialized market the only game in town, the only alternative that exists. It's a clever way, I guess, to do it. I mean, think about, there's a sense in which that is happening and I think will intensify in the United States. I think that as you regulate insurance companies more and more and more, you make them less and less profitable, you make it more and more difficult to do business. More and more insurance companies raise their prices or exit the market, so that now you have very few players in the insurance markets. Many states have very few insurance companies that are in those markets because they've been so heavily regulated, it's not profitable for them to be in those markets. Because there's so few insurance companies, they raise their prices. People can't afford it. and the state comes in and says, see, people are uninsured. We need Obamacare. We need socialized medicine. We need Medicare for all. This is how you set the system up for ultimately nationalization. I don't think in America it's done consciously, at least not by everybody. It might be done by some people consciously. But the effect is the same as what's going on in Colombia. This socialist, this leftist leader, Petro, who is the president of Colombia, elected in 2022, promising transformational changes. But when he tries to pursue those transformational changes, he gets blocked because the people don't actually want them. In a speech he gave at the United Nations in New York in 2022, he blamed capitalism for climate change, saying that it can lead to the destruction of humanity. So he is a leftist, a hater of capitalism, and using scare tactics. So you're seeing that in order to bring about socialism, they're willing to bring about a significant destruction of the private sector, and then again make the government the only alternative. Imagine if education in America was private, but you wanted to nationalize it. You would regulate the private educational system to death, and you would squeeze it every way you could, and you would make it so that the private schools would go bankrupt and everybody would have to go to the public schools, and that would elevate the public schools. So we will see. So far, the political party that has kind of control over Congress is the party of former president Alvaro Uribe. Uribe is definitely a pro-market guy, relatively speaking. He's one of probably the better presidents Colombia has had. Tried to move it to pro-markets. I met Uribe a couple of times. We actually did a seminar together. He's an interesting guy. But generally, leans more towards markets and certainly not a socialist. Uribe's party opposes the bill that would basically eliminate the role of private insurers. But it seems like he did agree to compromise with the president. So this is the problem, that even the advocates of a little bit more freedom are often the ones who compromise with the left and compromise with the socialists, so they get more and more and more power and more control. Anyway, as we said, I think that in future elections we're going to see slowly a move away from socialism in Latin America, and a move towards more right-wing, conservative, and in some cases free market political parties throughout the area, partially in response or partially inspired by the success of Milei, and partially inspired by the complete and utter failure of the leftist parties all over Latin America to achieve anything other than poverty and destruction. It is worth noting, just if we're talking about Colombia, that one of the leading candidates for president in the next election, probably I think it's next year, was also called Uribe, not related to that Uribe. He was a young congressman of the kind of center-right, and he was killed. Nobody knows exactly who killed him, but he was killed recently. He was shot at a campaign rally and was in a coma for a while, and they tried to save his life, and he died, I think, late last week. So Colombia politics is messy and violent, and right now it's hard to tell where things are heading. But Bolivia, as we talked about the other day, Bolivia has turned its back on the left and has embraced at least center-right candidates, and it'll be interesting to see who wins and whether they can turn around the Bolivian economy that's basically stagnated for the 20 years that the socialists have ruled it.